Hey everyone, it's been a while, hasn't it? Um, in today's video, I'm going to talk you through my process. I made a video like this about 2 years ago, but by now that's super outdated and really awkward to watch. So I thought it was about time to make a new one. This time I'm going to focus on portraits and, you know, my thoughts and my process particularly retaining to that, but this is kind of the process I use for all my paintings, at least my professional paintings. Before we get started though, I do have one semi-quick announcement to make. After about 2 years of going back and forth on whether or not I wanted to do this or not, and whether or not this was the right path for me, I have finally put together and launched my Patreon page. And I'm really excited about that, and I'm also really scared, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about it in this video. But basically, the reason I have decided to make it is because I've been doing freelance professional art for over 2 years at this point, and I really absolutely love it. Like, I'm super happy, and most of the time work is hard but fun, and I love it. But I have noticed that my personal art and personal projects in general have just really taken a backseat in terms of priority. I think this entire year I've made like 2 personal pieces, and I think I might have done like 1 piece of fan art, I'm not sure. But basically it's like barely anything. 95% of my work is professional work, and I'm just not happy with that. I want to create my own things. I have this huge project in mind that I never have the time to do because I just constantly have to focus on work to make the money I need to make to survive. I also really want to make more tutorials. I want to make more commentary videos like this one on YouTube. But there's just, up until this point, there just haven't been time for it. I haven't had like that extra time to just like sit down and work on my own things. So the way I've set it up right now, there are 3 tiers, and that's $1, $5, and $12. And I might expand them later. I might add more rewards. I might add another tier on top of them. But I just wanted to start out with something that was kind of simple, so I don't get like stressed out of my mind trying to fulfill all the rewards, and so you guys can like easily understand what you're getting. So I've linked the page down below in the description, so if you are interested, please go and check it out and see what the different rewards are. Among other things, you will get step-by-step breakdowns of all my illustrations. There's also a Discord server that I've made that's going to be a place where you can get art critique or just share art or connect with art friends. And then there will be real-time painting videos. For this current term, you will get the real-time video of this painting. And then there will also be tutorials. And those tutorials will be written. I want to make them video tutorials later. Currently, I just don't have the resources to record and edit 2 full video tutorials every term, but hopefully in the future I will make that happen. So anyway, if this sounds at all interesting to you, or you would like to support me, please check out the link below. I would really appreciate it. So thank you so much for listening to this entire rant. It ended up being quite long. I'm sorry. But yeah, thank you for listening, and if you do check it out, thank you so much. Now that's done, so let's talk about what we're actually here to talk about, my painting process. So first, let me just give you a tiny bit of background on what this painting actually is. This is a commission for one of my loveliest clients. I've worked with them, I think this is the 4th time, and they always have just really creative ideas. So for this one, the brief was to paint their void elf. Her name is Cedriel, and she's a botanist. So basically what she does is she experiments on plants by kind of infusing them with void magic. So the client's idea was that I would make a portrait and she would have like a bunch of plants in her hair that would be kind of like dark and void infested, and she also wanted the character to hold up her hand and have a butterfly on her finger. So that was what I was working with. I also had somewhat free reign on her outfit and her hair. So based on that, I pretty quickly got an idea of what I wanted to do. So basically what was important for me was I wanted to capture a melancholic atmosphere, and I wanted to have a lot of focus on her hair, and I wanted to kind of challenge myself with how the hand was placed, and I wanted to make really sure that that looked nice. So based on my plans, I started collecting some reference. Currently my setup is that I have my Wacom Intuos 4 tablet, and I have one like primary monitor and a second monitor that I use for reference. So the first thing I did was gather all the reference the client had given me, and also just like some portrait photography, so I had some real life reference to go off. And then I kind of just started sketching using a simple brush and using lines that are quite crude but efficient. And what you've been seeing for the past 6 minutes is me sketching what would be the first idea and not actually the one I went with. But anyway, once I had finished the lines, I just slapped some color onto it and a bit of atmosphere just so it would be presentable for the client. But then right as I finished this, even though I really liked the first one, I quickly got a second idea. So I just extended the canvas and I started drawing that on the other side. And again, I'm just using simple lines and a simple brush to kind of get my idea across. And with this one, I was going for a much more centered composition, and I was also way more focused on showing a bit more of her outfit. In the other one, she has her back turned, which is effective, but it's really hard to like show off any real detail when the only thing that's visible is her shoulder. Again, I'm laying in some colors just to communicate the mood, and so me and the client pretty quickly decided that this one was the best because it shows way more of the actual character, and it also has a bit more of a sad expression, whereas the other one was a bit more arrogant. So this fit the character better. So what I did then was I just took all of the layers from the earliest sketch and put them into a group, and then I took down the opacity and then started sketching on top of that. So here I was taking a lot of care to be clean with my lines, just so I would have a nice base to work with later. And this is something I usually don't do for my big pieces, just because doing a detailed sketch for like a full body painting with a background just takes a whole bunch of time and I'm not patient enough. But since this is a portrait, I really wanted to make an effort to have a clean workflow and just like a clean place to work from. So after that base sketch is done, I started laying in some colors, just flat colors underneath the sketch layer, and these are all on separate layers, so I can easily edit them with the hue saturation sliders in case there's any colors I'm not happy with. And I kind of just like, I start with a color that feels right, and if it doesn't look right, I just adjust it with the sliders. So once I was somewhat happy with the colors, I made some layers on hard light mode and I clipped them back to the main group, and that's how I create the lighting, or like try out different lighting setups and eventually decide on one. So I wanted to have like this blue light coming from below, like kind of coming from the butterfly but also coming from the ground, and then just like this other more neutral light coming like falling down basically on the top of her head, so it will illuminate the hand and make that stand out, and also just to make her face pop a bit more. So once I was happy with the lighting, I first started going in with a big airbrush below the sketch layer just to make some more nuances in the skin and to paint in her lip color, among other things. And then I made a different layer on top of the sketch, and I kept on refining things on that layer. And here I think I'm mainly just using an airbrush because I want to avoid having any like hard edges or harsh lines, because essentially the whole point of this step is just to get rid of the sketch and to have a solid foundation that you can then start putting detail and render into. So the fact that it's kind of a blurry mess doesn't really matter. What matters is that everything is in the place it's supposed to be and that the colors look correct. So here I've made an individual layer for everything that's on top of the sketch. Basically I have one layer where I refine the gold, one layer where I define the hair, one layer where I define her like sweater thing basically. And I just keep like kind of erasing away at the sketch and adding more detail. So for the face in particular, it's important to have a reference. For this one, I found a portrait that had like a similar angle and the person had features that I really liked. So I'm using that as a reference just to like make sure that the proportions of everything is correct. And that's a useful tip kind of always, but especially if you're going for like a semi-realistic style. Always use reference, especially when you're painting humans. So here I'm just going on refining things, still sticking to somewhat big brushes and just like keeping everything kind of soft. And I'm also making sure to stay relatively zoomed out just so I can get like a nice overview, because I don't want to like get sucked into details at this stage. At this early stage, basically, you just want to make sure that your proportions are correct, that your colors harmonize and look good, and that your lighting is correct. So once you've made sure that all that is in place and also that everything is kind of placed where you want it to be, that's when you can start to go in with smaller brushes and zoom in and actually like start refining things. So at this point I'm fairly happy with the placement of everything, and I'm fairly happy with the colors and the atmosphere. So now I'm going to start carving out the shapes basically. So I'm switching to a chalk brush. This is the chalk brush from Ross Trans brush sets, and it's really nice because it has texture and you can create really hard edges with it, but it's also nice and easy to blend with. So it's kind of the perfect brush to use in like the middle stage. We're just like somewhat refining things. So I'm making all the edges refined and putting in some more nuance into the gold, making sure that everything that's kind of pointed up towards the light source is lit and everything that's pointed downwards is not lit. And I'm also going in and making the light sources on the skin a bit stronger, just so there's a bit more contrast on her face. Her face is the focal point, so we want that to, you know, stand out and, you know, be nice and easy to see. So I just flipped the canvas for the first time, I think. You should really flip it more often than this. Especially like during the sketch process, make sure to flip your image frequently. Just make sure that there's not like any obvious mistakes that you're missing just because your eyes have gotten used to looking at them. Here I flipped it really late, and I'm not sure why I did it. I think I just like forgot for some reason. And as you can see, her face is kind of crooked and her head is kind of like, it looks like a weird egg that's kind of tilted. And this is stuff I would have avoided if I just flipped it earlier. So be diligent with your flipping and you'll avoid being stupid like me. Again, I'm just strengthening the shadows and the light sources, making everything pop a bit more, and also refining things further. By the way, as you can see if you look down on the layer tab, you'll see that everything is now merged into one main layer, and then I have the hair and the plants and the hand. The reason for that is I like having most of the things on one layer so I can easily move things and erase things. But then things like hair, which is very like, it's not a hard object, it's very like free-flowing and it gets everywhere and it's usually on top of things. That's nice to have on a separate layer, so if you start painting in hair strands and you realize they're in the wrong place, you can easily remove them without having to erase something important. The hand as well, which is essentially just like in the foreground, you want to have like an easy separation between your main layer and stuff that's, you know, clearly in front of the character, just so it's easier to move around. If you change your mind later, you're not like really stuck to one idea. And sometimes people ask like, how can I possibly work on one layer without just like making a bunch of mistakes? How I do that is basically whenever I am going to make a big change, or whenever I've been working for like maybe an hour or so, I will just duplicate the main layer and hide the previous one. So I have like backups along the way. So the main layer I have right now is like copy number 3, I think. So it's just like basically just making updates along the way. So if you fuck up, you can go back to it, but you still like get the benefit of having everything on one layer, so everything is like nice and easy to move. You'll also see me often going into full screen mode. That's it's just really nice for rendering in like the later stages of the painting, to have your whole screen be your canvas. It's just a lot easier to zoom in and refine things, basically. And it's also easier to focus because you don't have any like overlays or anything taking you away from the painting. And if you are going to use full screen, make sure to integrate shortcuts in your workflow. And if you're not already using shortcuts, start immediately, because they will save you so much time. The shortcuts I use are basically for brush size. That's the one I use the most. I have W set to increase brush size and S set to decrease brush size. And then I also have E for eraser and B for brush, so I can easily switch between them. Then I also have Z for zoom and a couple other ones, but those are the ones I use the most. And it just saves you so much time, and it lets you work way more focused and way more efficiently. So that's a big tip, using shortcuts. And I'm just refining further, and one thing that's important while you're rendering is not just to add detail, but also to think about what sort of materials you're actually painting. So I'm making sure that the gold parts look reflective and that the highlights on them are really strong. And I'm making sure that the material kind of just in the shoulder pads below the gold looks matte in comparison. And also I'm making sure to include a lot of hue variations. So if you look closely, you'll see that stuff isn't just blue, that there's you know, some purple in there and some green somewhere. You know, adding like subtle nuances like that really make your painting come to life. And now I'm working on the plants in her hair a little bit, and as you can see, they don't look like that great right now. I'm using reference for one of the plants because there's a plant like it in my room, but for the flowers I hadn't looked up any reference yet. And as you can see, especially the black one on the left side of her head looks really like basic and boring right now, and that's just because I haven't looked up any reference. So always, especially when you're painting things you are unfamiliar with, look up reference, because it makes a huge difference. I can't repeat that enough, honestly. There's also nothing wrong with using reference. It doesn't mean you're cheating, it just means you're smart. And here you can see the magic of reference. I looked up like black flowers and I immediately found this one that looks really like it's beautiful, but it's also kind of like gross looking, which is perfect for a void plant. So I backed up the old flower just in case this one turned out bad, and then I made a new layer and started painting it in. And this might be a given to some of you, but even though this flower is black and gray, I'm not actually using black and gray. I'm using dark blue and medium blue, and then I'm also putting some purplish tones in the middle of it just to make it a bit more interesting. I think I probably said this in my first tutorial, process tutorial as well. Basically, you never want to use straight up black and you never want to use straight up white. You can use gray sometimes, but I would have advised that you limit that as well. And the reason for this is basically just that these colors don't really occur in nature. If you have straight black, it's going to look like a void, because it's going to look like a hole, because real black does not exist in nature. Real white does not really exist either. You can maybe get away with using it for super specular highlights, but just like as a beginner rule, if you're not fully confident with colors yet, avoid black, white, and gray. You need to remember that every object is very much affected by its environment. So in this environment, where there's this like blue weird light coming from below and everything is like voidy and dark, every color is going to be affected by that blue atmosphere. So gray is going to turn blue, purple is going to turn warm blue, gold is going to turn like more of a green color. So remember that everything has a local color, which is the color the thing really is, and then it has the color that it becomes when it's affected by the light environment. So like maybe an object that is actually red, that does not mean you have to use red to paint it. Sometimes you have to use like desaturated yellow, sometimes you have to use like green to paint brown. Color behaves really strangely when it's affected by light, and the best way to learn about that is obviously reading up on color theory, but also doing a bunch of photo studies where you really pay attention to the colors. As I keep working on this, my main focus is keeping her expression in line with what the client wants, and I did discuss that with them. They really liked her expression in the very first draft, and in that the character looks like kind of melancholic and she's looking down at the butterfly with kind of a sad look in her eyes. So I really don't want to render too much and lose that expression, and I'm also making sure that her face looks very soft in contrast with her environment. Those are like my big focuses, and then I'm also putting a lot of detail into the hair. I kind of want like her face and her hair and the hand to be the main focuses, and then I'm kind of just using the gold shoulder pads and everything as compositional lines. So everything is kind of pointing inwards and upwards to her face. So basically those don't need to be rendered as much as everything else. That's kind of a lesson I've learned this year, is to let go of this notion that everything needs to be rendered to a T. You can have things that almost look like they're in the sketch stage, so long as they are not important elements in the painting. Like if your eye doesn't get drawn to it, then it's all good. So if you look at like the shoulder pad down in the right corner, there's barely any rendering there. I'm not going to do any more rendering there either, because having these areas of rest basically means that not only is the painting easier to look at because you're not like overwhelmed by all this detail, but it also gives it like a much more organic and I don't know, just like a more painterly pleasant feel. It's honestly better to have a painting that's a bit too rough than a painting that's a bit too rendered. And it's almost impossible to make a painting that is too rough, because as long as the painting is communicating whatever thing it's supposed to communicate, the rendering is almost like secondary. So at this point I have reached the stage where I'm basically happy with it. The expression is right, the hand looks nice and rendered. It really carries that melancholic blue dark atmosphere well. Not everything is rendered or perfectly sharp, but that's fine. So now I'm just making all my adjustments, and I'm doing that by making a new group on top of everything, and basically messing around with the hue saturation sliders and the curves tool. And then I noticed some things that I wasn't completely happy with, so I made a different layer on top of that, and I just painted in some more detail. And then you can barely see it in this video because it's going by so fast. Then I press Ctrl Alt Shift E, which basically creates a new layer that is all your layers combined into one. And on that layer I used Smart Sharpen. I can't remember the exact numbers I have it set to, but it's like around the 1/3 mark for both amount and radius. I don't like to go too heavy with this because it can ruin a lot of the nice and soft edges in the painting, but it's just a great way to make your painting a bit more sharp. So that's it. I didn't have time to explain everything in like minute detail in this video, but I hope you at least got an impression of what I think while I'm painting. Hopefully, if everything goes well with Patreon, I'll be able to make more videos, and more videos that are a bit more in-depth than this one. Nevertheless, I do hope you learned something and that you enjoyed it. As always, do let me know in the comments if you have any questions or maybe some suggestions for possible tutorials I could make. Remember to go give my Patreon a look if you are interested. Like I said earlier, if you want to see like the full real-time process video for this one, this took me 12 hours. If you want to see that and get even more of an like insight into my process, that will be available on Patreon. Yeah, thank you so much for watching.